Come indeed, O Lord, to fill our hearts with your peace. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, Jesus is coming to town. I can't imagine what it must have been like to have heard those words on the streets of Jericho. Jesus is coming to town. By this point in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus' reputation had spread throughout Palestine. Here was Jesus, the rabbi who taught with authority. He confronted the Pharisees and the scribes and called out their hypocrisy and reinterpreted their message to focus on love for all. Jesus cast out demons from those that had been plagued by demons for years. He healed people of all sorts of ailments. He shared his table with those who were outcasts. Not surprisingly, therefore, when Jesus reached the outskirts of Jericho, which lies near the Dead Sea, a large crowd of people lined the streets to see him, pressing against one another. They came for all sorts of reasons, some from curiosity to see this new celebrity, someone who was willing to stand up to those in power. But many more came for a word of grace, a bit of healing that they were in desperate need of. And amidst this crowd, as Mariah pointed out, was a chief tax collector of the region. And as most of you know, tax collectors were among the most hated people in ancient Palestine. Now, let's be honest, nobody likes paying taxes. They didn't like it then, and I know that people, especially in Texas, don't like it now. Now, back then, taxes were collected by something known as tax farming. So think of it like the IRS, but being outsourced. The ruler contracted with individuals to collect taxes on his behalf. Each tax farmer had a certain amount that they had to owe to this ruler. And anything they collected beyond that amount went directly into their pockets. As you can imagine, the potential for abuse was endless. And even when the system wasn't abused, everyone knew that the tax collector's new Mercedes was paid for by excess taxes collected from you. And Palestine, of course, was ruled by the Romans and their client states. So not only was someone a tax collector, but someone was a tax collector on behalf of the Romans and those who supported them. So as Jesus enters Jericho, the chief tax collector of the region, whose name was Zacchaues, ran to join the crowd so he could greet Jesus. Now the text never tells us why exactly Zacchaues is there, but something about him must clearly have mattered, and mattered to him intensely. You can see that intensity of his devotion in this text. Now he was a short guy, which I think is a pretty interesting detail they add. Very short guy. So he couldn't see Jesus over the crowd of people in front of him. And so he runs ahead. And I can see his short legs and arms pumping as he dodges the crowd like a 10-year-old. And he eyes a tree, a sycamore, one that has low branches so that even he can climb. And he quickly climbs up that tree, shimmies up the tree so he catches a glimpse of Jesus as he passes by. Now here's someone who is the chief tax collector in town. Okay, this guy is rich. I mean, like really rich. The text makes that very clear. And yet he's hanging from some tree to see Jesus as he passes by. As I thought of this, I was picturing in my head scenes from like the Astros World Series victory parade in 2017. And I was trying to imagine like a very short Tillman Fertitta, like hanging from a lamppost, trying to see the Astros as they pass by. Anyway, then as Jesus passes by, with all the crowds pressing around him, Jesus calls out to Zacchaues. Zacchaues, hurry up, come down. Today, I'm going to stay at your place. Now, we have no idea how Jesus knew Zacchaeus' name or anything about him. Maybe he saw his clothes and recognized him as someone who was rich. Perhaps he had heard rumors about this particular chief tax collector. Who knows? Whatever the reason, Jesus says that he has to go stay. He has to. It is required. It is necessary for him to go stay with Zacchaues. And Zacchaues is overjoyed with this good news. I mean, after all, the big celebrity is coming to stay with him. So he comes down the tree and leads Jesus off to his home. Now the crowd, which is following them the whole time, sees this, and they are not happy about this. I mean, not happy at all. They came out to see Jesus. They came out to receive some blessing from him, and Jesus chooses this tax collector, this great sinner, to go hang out with. Then we have the key verses in this whole passage. Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." Here is another person whose life was changed by Jesus. Zacchaeus goes from being a sinner to being as generous a person as you'll ever find. I mean, he's giving away half his possessions. Think about this as a stewardship letter. Fantastic. Jesus chose Zacchaeus from the crowd of people around him, and moved by this gracious act, Zacchaeus repented of his ways and therefore earned salvation. He earned a spot in heaven. What a great message. Alas, however, there are a few problems with this standard interpretation of the text. The first is, there's no real indication that Zacchaeus actually repents of anything. There's no indication that he has some newfound faith. It doesn't say, oh, Zacchaeus. And he says, oh, I beat my chest, or that, oh, I now all of a sudden is going to follow Jesus. There's also no sense that he all of a sudden has become a disciple of Jesus. All those things are simply implied. Now, Zacchaeus doesn't. Now, the second issue of the text is that it implies by making promises of giving away money that perhaps you can earn entry into heaven. And while prosperity gospel preachers might love this text, and again, those in the stewardship committee might love it as well, it goes against what we see about salvation in the other parts of the gospel. You can't buy your way into heaven. It's a gift. It's given by God. Well, the final and biggest issue with the standard reading of the text is that it doesn't line up with the most straightforward reading of the Greek. The original text reads, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I give to the poor. Not, look, Lord, half my possessions I will give to the poor. The key word is actually in the present tense in Greek. And the second part likewise reads, if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I pay back 4 times as much, not I will pay back. In other words, Zacchaeus is already, before he meets Jesus, incredibly generous with what he has. But apparently other people just don't know that. Now, when we read the text in this way, the entire framing of the passage changes. Zacchaeus is hated by his fellow residents of Jericho because he is the chief tax collector. He's ostracized from their company. Jesus presumably somehow knows of Zacchaeus' generosity and gives him the opportunity there to tell the crowd. Then Jesus responds to Zacchaeus by saying, today salvation has come to this house because he too is, present tense, a son of Abraham. In other words, salvation has come today, not in some future time, because Zacchaeus is able to repair his relationship with the community. He too is a son of Abraham. He too deserves to be part of the community. Yes, he's a tax collector, but the reality is someone has got to do that job. Someone will end up being, like it or not, the chief tax collector. But Zacchaeus does that job in as moral a way as one could. He already gives to the community generously and strives to be honest in his dealings. Now, one reason I like this second reading so much is it reframes the notion of salvation. Salvation is not something that you wait for in some future time. It's not simply about getting into heaven. Salvation is something that can happen in the here and the now. The definition of salvation that I prefer is not the one we typically hear about here in Houston. Instead, it's the one offered by one of my good buddies, Paul Tillich. Tillich links salvation with the Latin word salvus, which is where we get the English word salvation from. Salvus means literally healing or wholeness. So to be saved, to have salvation, is to be delivered from sin, from separation. It is to be made whole. And we see that in this text. Jesus is made whole, or Zacchaeus is made whole. He is made a part of his community again. He overcomes that separation. He is seen for who he really is, and it brings true healing to him. It brings true healing to him that day, because that's what the text says. Today, salvation has come to this house. Today, not at some future point, after Zacchaeus dies. Now, in this framework on salvation, seeing salvation as wholeness and healing, this type of way of seeing salvation does have clear links with money. After all, this is a stewardship sermon, just to be clear on that. Zacchaeus receives salvation from Jesus' presence and by Jesus creating for him an opportunity for healed relationship. Now, these people in Jericho are then able to see Zacchaeus in a new light, and it reaffirms Zacchaeus' commitment to do the right thing with his money. And consider for a moment that relationship between money and salvation. Not in the sense of buying your way into heaven, but that sense of wholeness, healing. Salvation is overcoming separation from ourselves, others, and God. If there's one thing that can bring an incredible amount of stress and pain, it is money, or lack thereof. There are those people, and there are a lot of them, who make money into their God. Money is what drives them. We all know folks like this. Money is how they keep score on how successful their life is. They work endlessly to get more money so they can buy the bigger house, the better car, the designer clothes, go on fancy vacations. They're constantly comparing themselves in terms of monetary success with others. And when the money is there, all is good, or at least it seems to be. These people have the money, and so they're happy, content. They've won, at least for the moment, until the next shiny thing comes along that draws their attention. A couple months ago, I remember running across this article about super yachts. That is, those yachts that are over 100 feet long. I've actually never seen one of these in person, but I've seen photos at least. The article talks about how super yachts these days, in this era we're living in, super yachts are the ultimate prize now for those who have money, like a stupid amount of money. Now, these super yachts cost between $50 and $500 million. And this article talked about how, in the past 10 years, there's been this rush, this move, this bonanza about buying bigger and bigger super yachts, as though someone with a 250-foot yacht will be that much happier than someone with a 150-foot yacht. It's a type of article that does make your stomach churn. I mean, here are people worth hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars, and yet even for them, they don't have enough. They have to have more. And the question is, what is salvation when that's your framework? What does salvation look like to these people? Does the bigger super yacht bring them more healing, more wholeness? Does it make them feel more connected to God or others, or overcome conflicts within themselves? Chasing after money for money's sake does not bring salvation in that sense. But also think of the amount of stress that happens when there's not enough money. Now, I'm not talking about people who make money their idol. I'm talking about people like us. Most of us, I imagine, have been through times when money is tight. Some of us have had to endure times of being in debt, sometimes crippling debt. What did those situations feel like? Did they bring salvation, healing, connection? Heavens no. When money is tight, it leads to the opposite experience. It can break apart marriages. It can divide family members against one another. It can bring someone to their knees when they think that they are worthless as people. Given the degree to which a lack of money can cause us so much pain, we should be highly motivated to make sure that that does not happen. We should be motivated to live well below our means, and we should strive to have as big a cushion with money as possible. It's not that we shouldn't spend money, but we should see how our expenditures can potentially cause pain and can lead us away from salvation, from wholeness. Zacchaues gets this. He could have spent his vast fortune on the next great super yacht on the Dead Sea, although he wouldn't be able to go very far. But Zacchaues doesn't do that. He lives far, far below his means. And that also gives him the opportunity to create healing for others who are going through hard times with money. He can help those in need, in real need, and bring them relief, bring them wholeness. He, through his generosity, can be a vehicle of salvation for others. Now, of course, it must be said that many people do not have the option of living below their means. After all, expenses are real things. You do have to eat food, and that costs money. You need a place to live, that costs money. If you live in Houston, you need a car, at least likely you do. That costs money. You need health insurance. That also costs money. If you have children, expenses can multiply, seemingly without end. Braces, sports teams, other activities, school tuitions, buying a home in a good school district, you name it. For so many, it can seem as though there is no possible way to live in contemporary American society and actually live well below your means. But if we want salvation, if we want wholeness, and to feel connected to others and to God, living below our means is something that we should all strive for, if we are able to. And that link between money and salvation has other implications as well. As I mentioned earlier with regard to Zacchaues, our gifts of money can bring wholeness and healing to those who are in need. Raise Up Families, one of the organizations that we support here at FCC, helps families gain financial independence through rent and utility assistance, education around finances, and ongoing one-on-one support. To be able to offer a family a path to security and a home is to be able to offer them a sense of wholeness. It can relieve tremendous stresses. Memorial Assistance Ministries also helps people in their time of need in a variety of ways. Right now, we here are collecting money, if you read through your bulletin, we are collecting money so that families who live at Zacchaues Heights Village, the HUD-supported housing development that FCC helped build, can have food for their Thanksgiving meals. During our mission moment, Phyllis Roberts will talk about the salvation work that East Spring Branch Food Pantry does in our area. They also are doing a food drive this month. Wherever you look, there are opportunities for us to use our money to bring healing, wholeness. TMO is working to elect candidates for state office who will expand Medicaid in Texas, which will bring literal healing in the form of health insurance to millions of Texans. This is salvation work. All of these efforts, Raise Up Families, MAM, Zacchaues Heights, East Spring Branch Food Pantry, TMO, among many others, have been founded and supported by FCC and other churches. Churches are vehicles of salvation. Churches bring us healing through connecting us with God and with one another. Churches shape our values, inspire us to work on behalf of God, educate our children, raise our awareness of pressing issues, and support us in times of need and grief. Churches and other houses of worship are the moral center for our culture and our society. A week and a half ago, I was attending the annual fundraising luncheon for MAM, Memorial Assistance Ministries. One of the featured speakers was David Weekley, who has been phenomenally successful in the home construction business. At the luncheon, David said that he and his wife have been inspired by their church to give away half their fortune. Half. Now, as you should know by now, FCC is in the middle of a stewardship campaign. This is the time of year when we ask you to consider what type of financial pledge you can make to support the work of FCC in the next year. As I wrote in my letter to you, this year will be a challenging year for stewardship. The financial markets have had a tough year. That means that many of you feel far less flush financially than you did a year ago. Moreover, given the high rate of inflation, there are pressing financial needs both in your own families and here at FCC, even with FCC's conservative financial budgeting. Now, stewardship challenges are not new. Anyone who's been around a church for a long time knows that they're not new. Because any church that strives to do as much good as it can will always have pressures about where to spend their money. That is a good thing, because that means that there's a lot going on and the church is pressing itself to do more. But we still do need your commitments. And I hope you can see when you look around this place the very real salvation work that goes on here. I hope you know that your money is well spent and that it goes towards fostering wholeness and healing, both for you and for so many outside our walls. And FCC's unique witness in this neighborhood is needed now as much as ever. Some of you might know, we've been planning to build a new sign for our church right out there in the parking lot. The current sign, of course, is very small, and it's hard to read when you're driving by. So the new sign, in order to put it up, because we do live in a society that has this, needs a variance from the city in order to have it installed. Now, because our sign has a very small rainbow on it, there has been a sizable backlash by our community members against this new proposed sign. Now, this rainbow is quite small and innocuous, but there are many people in this neighborhood who so oppose LGBT rights that they would be willing to do whatever they can to block this sign, including giving up their evening so they can come and make a stink about, oh, the sign is too wide. It's not actually too wide. Or the sign is too tall. It's not actually too tall. What do they care about? A little rainbow on it, and they just don't want that so much. To say that this angers me is a dramatic understatement. It also saddens me that I personally am not accepted by so many people who live in this community, this area where the church is. It also frustrates me that the Hunters Creek City Council is not more willing to stand up and say, no, this is the right thing, you're a church, you have the constitutional right to go ahead and do this. This church's witness does matter. To have a progressive Christian oasis here in Hunters Creek Village makes a difference. It is a beacon of God's love for so many. And I hope you will consider in the weeks ahead, the relationship between money and salvation in your life. And I hope you do your part to ensure that this ark of salvation that we call FCC will have a vibrant future in the years ahead. I personally have been immensely grateful for the love and amazing work of this congregation. And with your generosity, I know those who will come after you will be equally grateful for your support.